Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, April 24th, 2025. I'm John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, a man of many titles, most importantly, Commentary Magazine contributing editor, a columnist for the New York Times, and the editor of Sapir and the host of the upcoming Sapir debates at the 92nd Street Y, Brett Stevens.
Good
Welcome,
to see you,
Brett.
John. Nice to be here.
So, Brett, you have a very provocative column and a very amusing column came out yesterday in the paper in the New York Times called The Faceplant Presidency. And I think as we are here on day 94 of the Trump presidency, we have seen this remarkable combination of an administration coming out of the block like Secretariat, charging ahead, getting 31 lengths ahead of every other horse in the Belmont Stakes, and then tripping and rolling over, one leg breaking, then the other leg, the third leg breaking, like he's like absolutely got the entire world in a tizzy about everything that he's doing from campus and domestically, campuses, immigration, all of this. And then once Liberation Day and Tariff Day came, I think, it was as though, it's like this is a landmark day in the 3 months of the Trump presidency where everything just seemed to turn on a dime. No matter, people were saying he was a fascist, he was like going to institute the authoritarian regime, he was going to cancel the elections, he was going to run for 8 terms and all of that, and they were terrified of him, and some people are still terrified of him. But you aver in this column that people may be thinking about this in the wrong way because there's something almost comic now about the number of self-inflicted wounds that he has inflicted on himself, like all self-inflicted wounds.
So before we get started, I have a feeling that a number of our listeners will be more familiar with the name Secretariat than the term faceplant. So
we have readers, and readers are older than most people.
So yes. some of our readers will remember Secretariat's great 1973 run.
Something like that, yeah.
But faceplant, a term of art for falling on your face, popular with my kids. So just to clarify that one point. Look, I think the fiasco actually. The tone of this sort of disastrous early start to the presidency was set by the choice of Matt Gaetz back in November, a wholly self-inflicted political wound that was difficult to explain, except in some in terms that were more psychological than political. Then a series of ill-considered choices for cabinet posts, and then a whole set of political mistakes culminating in so-called Liberation Day, the Tariff Day. But I think culminating mainly and especially for the purposes of commentary readers, because I think that's when people on the right who had been sort of reluctantly supportive of the president, saw him as the better alternative last year, suddenly realized that this guy was going to create major harm, never mind to democracy, liberalism, the fate of the world, but to their stock portfolios. And I think that's when the people really began to sense that this was, as you put it, Secretariat coming out fast and collapsing on the course.
Because, you point out Matt Gaetz, and obviously there's RFK and there are Pam Bondi and there are all sorts of weird cabinet choices that are disturbing. And yet he comes out of the block. He moves very fast and very hard on campus anti-Semitism, on matters that are of deep importance not only to us but to you, takes measures, or seems to be seems to be moving to take measures to use the law in the form of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and others to confront these institutions with their horrifying refusal to protect Jewish students and to treat them unequally in a bad way, and all that. And so all of that looked to some of us very promising and heartening. And then there was the full-throated defense of Israel's efforts against Hamas in Gaza that such a sea change from the tone that the Biden administration had taken in the final year of its existence. And yet, even there, as time has proceeded, we have him playing footsie with Iran, dealing with terms on the possible Iran deal that are now being parsed Talmudically to say that they are not a repeat of the Obama-Iran deal by some people who are trying to keep themselves, I think, in favor or at least in influence, claiming the latest claim is Marco Rubio telling Barry Weiss that no, Steve Witkoff wasn't talking about how Iran should be allowed to enrich, should only enrich uranium to 3.5%, and that would be fine with us, which was the specific term in the Iran deal, but that it shouldn't be allowed to import uranium.
Yeah.
At a great, which first of all, I don't understand that it's a distinction without a difference in any case. But why would Iran import uranium when it has centrifuges that can make it itself? And where do you import uranium from exactly? I was unaware that there was a big export market.
Oh, there is actually, but that's another story.
Not a on the dark web. Yeah, but anyway.
Well, I mean, I actually wrote this column back in January. I think even possibly before Trump's inauguration. I wrote a column that said the Israeli right may soon come to regret Donald Trump's election, and I pointed to the fact that he was as likely to cut a terrible deal with the mullahs as he was to, really put their program out of action, because Trump has no principles and has no loyalties and has, outside of tariffs, it seems, no really fixed ideas. And, those of us who have been opponents of Trump for a long time saw this. I mean, we're opponents of his from the old, Reaganite right saw this. Just as I think we saw that, what is now seems to be unfolding in Ukraine was totally predictable. I took a lot of shit from certain friends of mine for my highly reluctant vote for Kamala Harris on the Hamiltonian theory that I'd rather have someone I can forthrightly oppose in the White House than a character like Trump destroying what I think of as conservatism, and I feel vindicated by that view.
Well, I'm not going to vindicate you, and I'm not going to vindicate you in that view. But I didn't vote for him either, as I've told people. I wrote Tom Cotton in, so I wouldn't have to vote for either. Which people may think is a dodge, but I live in New York City, so it's a throwaway vote, no matter how you slice it.
Can I say something about the faceplant issue? This is what I find, I have to say, that's still fascinating about Trump to me, which is that I feel like the faceplant has not quite happened and almost never exactly happens. Like it's like Zeno's paradox. Like his face gets closer and closer and closer to the ground without ever hitting it somehow.
I'm picturing the Mission Impossible scene with Tom Cruise.
To the ground.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. Look, so yes, you are a forthright anti-Trump person, but here's why I don't think it's fair to accuse you, for example, of Trump derangement syndrome, unlike other people, which is we're talking about things that are based in policy here, and that's why the faceplant thing was so resonant to me, which is that the mistakes that he is making and the errors that he is introducing into his own journey forward, as somebody who, for the first time in his public life, was scoring in the polls over 50%, and I mean from 2015 onward, these wounds are all self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Democrats are in bad shape. Nobody likes them. The Democrats are polling at 25, 26, 27%. There is no lead. There is no figure to contest with him. So he's the one who is face planting, punching himself in the face. Now he gets help from judges. I mean, he gets help maybe from judges who go too far, or the rhetoric, or, whatever, Chris Van Hollen going and having a margarita with a gang member in a jail in El Salvador rather than simply talking about due process, like somehow elevating this problematic person in jail in El Salvador rather than going at the real issue, which is the lawlessness of the administration's pursuit of these illegal aliens. So that he gets a little help from. But he hasn't dropped 8% in the polls, and he's not at 40% in the Pew polls because of the Democrats. That's everything that has gone wrong is the result of his own behavior. That's kind of new. I mean, not that presidents are always good.
Not with him, but
it was never even this bad. I mean, the precipitousness of this, in other words, that he had the country behind him.
Yeah.
And that he's frittering it away. I mean, not the whole country.
Yeah, and I've actually, I've kind of bent over backwards to try to support him in places or compliment him in the pages of the Times. The getting rid of DEI in the military and throughout the federal government was, long overdue and a blessing. Getting control over the border as quickly as he has, basically through essentially not only policy but verbal threats, has been an achievement. I'm stretching myself to find areas on which to give him credit, but he is in the process of very rapidly, literally destroying the American economy. I'm in touch with people, friends of mine, who run small and medium-sized businesses that are heavily reliant, even if not for most of their work, for some of it, on imports from other countries, not just China, and these are businesses that run on very, very tight margins. They're being destroyed. Bonuses are not going to be paid. Large numbers of employees are going to be laid off, all in pursuit of a bonkers economic theory discredited sometime in the mid 1930s.
There is about Trump yesterday. If you listen to Trump talk about the tariffs on China and how they weren't going to be that bad, and it was all they were going to get much lower, and he's not going to fire Jay Powell from the Fed. I mean, he wishes he'd lower interest rate, and he speaking very calmly, very much trying to sound like a reasonable person and calm the markets and make people. But it did remind me of the famous, rabbinical, the story of the couple that lives in the house that's too small. They come to the rabbi and they're like, "We have 10 children. We're in one room. I can't take it. I don't know what to do." And the rabbi says, "Bring in the cow. Bring the cow into the house." And the guy says, "What are you talking about? I don't want a cow in the house. This is insane. There's 12 of us living in one room." He says, "Bring the cow in the house." Goes back a week later, says, "Now the cow's in the house," and the cow is leaving patties everywhere, and there are 11. Now there's 10 people and a cow. And then he says, "Bring in the chickens." "What are you talking about? Bring us in the chickens." And then, a week later comes and says, "Our lives are just a nightmare." And then the rabbi says, "So take out the cows and the chickens, and then think of how much better your life is going to be without the cows and the chickens. Then you'll appreciate being in the house without the cows and the chickens." Like, Trump is the one who brought the cows and the chickens into the house in the U.S. economy. Nobody was saying, what we really need now is tariff. Let's do it now. This is it. Not only that, but the one measure that we were taking economically and geopolitically against China right? Which was, and that Congress had passed as a matter of law,
Yeah.
he lawlessly suspended, which was the
TikTok.
forced sale of TikTok, which was a very serious measure to take against our foe and to help ourselves and all of that. And that he, with no legal right to do so, announces a 6-month suspension in the sale of TikTok.
I mean, there is a kind of a George Costanza principle at work here, and I almost wish Democrats, including far left Democrats, would start feverishly arguing for a peace deal with Russia, feverishly arguing for 200% tariffs on our friends. Go for broke. Demand not only that Denmark hand over Greenland, but immediate, bringing the 82nd Airborne down on nuke, and then we might have the possibility of good policy making.
What's funny about the half faceplant stuff also is that Wall Street is also bending over backwards to try to give him credit where they can find it, and if and when that stops happening, all of the market reactions are going to be much worse, right? Wall Street is like, when he takes a half step back on tariffs, Wall Street like jumps. You see these headlines like Wall Street elated at Trump announcement on tariffs, and it's like they're just dying to buy and to move those numbers and to reward him. It's almost like it's like training someone. It's like they're trying to show him, like, you get a piece of candy every time you pull back X percent on the tariffs. But that in itself is probably hiding the true damage being done to the economy, because people who don't follow it may be saying, like, well, it's all reversible, right? Because if on Monday, if he puts in tariffs, and then on Wednesday, if he says we're pulling back on the tariffs, the market bounces back. And so all of this is like playing with chips or with house money. It's not really as bad as it seems. And I think the wealth that gets destroyed along the way that doesn't come back is hidden by all this bouncing around. It's almost as if the market should just tell him, like.
But there's also the uncertainty.
But it's not hidden, and that I think is what's important here is that he is getting unmistakable signals in every conceivable direction, right? Not only he cares about polls, he's down in aggregate 7% in the polls from where he was 3 months ago. That is a big drop in a country as hyper partisan and divided as ours is. That means that there is a withdrawal of affect from him by people who voted for him. That's the hardest thing to take, right? So he's got
there's no perception, there's no sense from the White House. I mean, you pointed to the other day that he seemed pleasant and mild-mannered, that he comprehends the hardship that he's causing, or rather he comprehends it and thinks it's all a price worth paying on the long march to autarky, or whatever he's trying to achieve. I mean, he's losing farmers, he's losing small business guys, who voted for him enthusiastically. He's going to lose the core of MAGA at this rate, because ultimately what sustained him through the Biden years was the memory of a strong U.S. economy in the first 3.5 years of his first term. That goes, and he will have the Republican Party will have the biggest reversal in its history, at least since the 30s, and you could have an extraordinary sea change in the composition of Congress in 18 months' time.
So, as I say, I think all of the relevant signals are being sent. So Seth is saying there's the positive signal, which is say one half of a sentence at 12:30 in the afternoon about something that doesn't sound so terrible, and then people start buying and the market goes up 300 points, and then say something at 2 that it doesn't sound good, the market goes down 900 points. Like that is not that may be a carrot and stick system of some sort, but it has no enduring ability to calm people who are getting more and more and more worried. And I'm not here talking about, hedge fund people or people who run, major banks or running or have gigantic stock portfolios like Brett, you're saying. What I'm hearing from and what people I know are hearing is people who just have normal supply chains to deal with the businesses that they run, who are already seeing crazy disruptions that are hampering their ability to do the things that they do, and that seem to be happening to them for no reason. It's not COVID. There isn't a pandemic. It's not that we're at war with China. It's not. We're certainly not at war with the unpopulated islands of the South Pacific where we levied 87% tariffs. There's no reason for this to have happened, and he cannot, and they cannot explain it. And now we know that like half of the administration sensibly thinks that this was all psychotic, and that they're all trying to talk to Trump while they've got Peter Navarro. It's like, oh, hey, Peter, there's a call for you over in the East Wing. Go take the call. And then someone shut the door and tell him he's got to stop. He's got to lower the tariff. This is, and we have 3 years and 8 months to go yet with this presidency. So
where is Susie Wiles in all this? Why isn't she directing traffic a bit better? If Navarro is such a problem,
because she's not. Susie Wiles is a campaign staffer. Now, sometimes campaign staffers can move into the job of White House chief of staff and do a good job. The only thing we know about Susie Wiles on policy, according to that, absolute blockbuster of a story about Trump forcing, telling the Israelis that he's not going to help with the strike, and the leak of the story itself being a way of trying, as you yourself wrote, Seth, trying to destroy the possibility of an Israeli strike on Iran, is that she was for not striking Iran. That's literally the only thing we know about her in terms of policy in these first 93 days, because nobody talks about her. So where is Susie Wiles? She's Pat Summerall's daughter who runs campaigns in Florida, and now she's the White House chief of staff because she seems to be a Trump whisperer. But if she's playing any role in policy, we have no idea. This is the only first indication of what she thinks in politics.
In the first administration, you had a number of people in senior cabinet positions. They didn't last all that long, but they were prepared to say no to the president. I mean, there's that famous scene of Gary Cohn literally removing an order to revoke the U.S.-South Korea free trade agreement from the president's desk before he could sign it. You had John Bolton steering him away from what would have been a disastrous deal with North Korea. There's no one fulfilling that role in the White House or in the cabinet, because everyone came into this presidency sort of in awe of Trump and afraid of him, more afraid than they'd ever been before, because the people he selected for senior cabinet positions were absolute nobodies outside of the offices that Trump had anointed them with. I mean, no one had really heard of Kash Patel or Pam Bondi before they came into high office. And so there's no one in the Republican Party who's prepared to say no, or the people who are people on their way out, like Senator McConnell or Lisa Murkowski. That's a real problem for Republicans. There has to be someone in the Republican Party, a Howard Baker or a Barry Goldwater who can go to the president and say, "Shut up! Stop doing this! No." You're going to destroy yourself, and you're going to destroy the country, and you're going to destroy your legacy. There's no one out there. I mean, I think of Marco Rubio now promoting a Ukrainian quote-unquote peace deal, a surrender deal, which is exactly what he voted to oppose just a couple of years ago. mean, it's stunning. Although in his case, maybe not entirely stunning.
But the only thing, in a sense, that gave the establishment Republicans during the first Trump presidency the sort of power to rein him in was that Trump didn't know how things worked, and so there was a you could come to him and say, no, well, you can't do that because X, Y, and Z, and he's not in that position anymore. So even if he had an administration that wasn't made up of yes men or people who genuinely agreed with him, why would he listen to them? He's been around a billion pro free market businessmen who hate tariffs. He's heard the arguments. He doesn't. He thinks he's right, and unless you tell him, oh, and even then maybe, but unless you tell him, no, you literally cannot do this. This is not within your power. Why would he? Why would he listen to someone who would say no to him at this point?
Okay, so there is this. Jonah Goldberg wrote something very good on the invocations by people like even people who are admirable and have done admirable work, even though they are rhetorically maybe extremists, like Chris Rufo, like this idea, this kind of weird Gramsci envy. The idea that the left figured out in the 1960s that what it needed to do was undergo this long march through the institutions, take over institutions everywhere, burrow themselves in, replace themselves with people who are like them as other people leave, and they take control of the culture, and they take control of the universities, and they take control of the what came to be known as the deep state. And that what Trump needed to do and Republicans need to do is duplicate the
Yeah.
be Gramscians on the right. And I think that this is a horrible misreading of this moment. We really talked about this much before, but one of the reasons that Trump got reelected is that the corruption of Gramsciism became evident to people in the United States in the form of DEI, sort of the star chambers, the emergency powers asserted by governors and mayors and people like the CDC suspending evictions, all of that people said, wait a minute, who's running this country? What is going on here? Like I didn't think that the head of a doctor could tell me I can't evict a tenant who hasn't paid me for 9 months. What the hell is going on here? Somebody has gotten control of the levers of power, and those hands on those levers of power need to be removed. And now the activists of the right are simply attempting to duplicate
Yeah.
that, when the American people, I believe, have been making it clear that they are onto the game of manipulating the levers of power. And the thing to do is to stop manipulating the levers of power, not to just take the levers of power over and shift them to the right. I could be wrong. They could be wiser than I am. Power is power, and people always will seek to enhance their power. But I don't know. Like, I think the long-term argument that this stuff with no one wants to be favorably disposed toward Abrego Garcia unless you're a far leftist. But if they are allowed to just throw anybody in jail without due process, that's not good for me or my 17-year-old who speeds and then gets crosswise of a crazy suburban cop who decides he wants to throw him in jail, or say, oh, you have a name with an O at the end, I'm going to call ICE and they'll put you on a plane before we discover you're an American citizen. I don't think that's I think that's common sense on the part of people. They've seen what happens when government asserts too much authority, and Trump is asserting too much authority.
Yeah, but right now the pushback is not coming from where he needs to hear it. I mean, my writing this column in the New York Times, I can assure you, has zero influence on the thinking of the president or people in his circle. I'm just a rhino, or whatever they want to call me. It has to start coming from it has to start coming from Fox News. It has to start coming from uh, the folks at whatever those the Federalist or his usual gang of worshipers. But the problem there is that they're not so much a political movement in search of policy goals. They're a cult that seeks to enhance the status of its leader. I mean,
So
I was
yeah,
so struck. I was so struck. I just have to say by I don't know if you read this essay in Politico on last I forgot when it appeared. I think Sunday from this guy John Ulya,
yeah.
who is a senior aide or was a senior aide to Hegseth, very very MAGA guy. I have to confess I'd never heard of him until I read this essay, basically painting a picture of total dysfunction in Hegseth's Pentagon. And Donald Trump Jr.'s riposte to Ulya was to say, "You are exiled from our movement." I think that was just an exceptionally telling statement in terms of the way in which they think of what is, after all, a senior position in the Pentagon. It's not about the defense of the country or something. It's you are exiled from our movement. This is like the Erdogan movement taking over the the, the Turkish civil service and government by degrees in Turkey in the early part of this century. It's not a regular political party.
But okay, but the Erdogan, you're using the Erdogan example. So Erdogan was an exceptionally effective politician, right?
Yeah,
Who had actually learned how to be a populist, having governed, right? He was the mayor of Istanbul. He knew how to function in the levers of power in a complicated country with a complicated history toward its own democratic institutions. And he was exceptionally nimble in using the ones that he wanted and in discarding the others and in taking over the military so it could not act as a check on him. And I think the faceplant presidency column is particularly telling because Trump is incompetent. Like
yeah,
that is a competent version of Trump, if such a thing could be imagined. Now, maybe a competent version of Trump couldn't actually end up getting the presidency in some odd way because that he really would seem like too revolutionary a figure when going down the
yeah,
road toward the presidency, and the public would rear in horror and not say, "Oh, it's just all an act, and he's fun and it's funny, and he's just an insult comedian and all of that," which is that game. Um, Hegseth is a perfect example of a faceplant under presidency. He gets this
That's a full face plant.
yeah, but I mean, he gets this unbelievable opportunity,
Yeah.
right? And he, rather than like, oh my God, like I'm running the Department of Defense of the United States. I have been elevated far beyond my station. I better do this with great care. And instead he's like, "Hey, you want to see my battle plan for Yemen? Oh, my brother would really love to see my battle plan for Yemen. It's so cool." Like
yeah,
that's not,
Honey,
you
come
could
in here.
see,
We're talking about war.
yeah, no, but you could see how
But
a more rational person would say, "I'm being entrusted with this big opportunity, responsibility. I could end up president of the United States for all I know. I don't know. Let me spend some time figuring out how to do this job." Instead, 18 people have been in and out of his near office, been fired, been investigated for leaks. He's leaking, he's setting up signal channels. And so Trump puts in these people who are loyal to him, and they're exactly like him, except that he has proved to be unexpectedly competent at getting elected president of the United States, if nothing else. And they are competent at nothing except being on Fox.
But Brett, I have a question for you about some things you said. You said earlier that you think at this rate Trump could lose the sort of MAGA core, right?
yeah.
You also said that
Well, he could lose.
the people he
I
needs to
don't.
hear
Let
from.
me put it this way:
Okay,
he could lose the MAGA penumbra.
right,
He'll never lose the MAGA core.
right. Okay, that's
Yeah,
sort of yeah.
that's what I'm
That
thinking
obviates
of.
my question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's I saw where this was going, and
Yes.
I kicked the ball away just as you were about to score a goal.
I wasn't.
No, I mean, look, I was doing something I rarely do. I was watching CNN the other day. I think it was Jake
My
Tapper
condolences.
interviewing these farmers in West Virginia. I mean, you could not ask for a more stereotypical depiction of
79%, right? The vote,
yeah.
Trump won West Virginia by 49% or something like that.
And these are farmers who are dependent on all kinds of imports for fertilizer, seed, one thing or another, and they are living at the very margins of making a life for themselves. Enthusiastic Trump voters for a variety of reasons, but talking about the destruction of their livelihood, and those are the people I mean. I think there's always going to be a group of MAGAites who will be with him, for the long march, so to speak, because with them, it's they're dealing with a kind of ideological fixity. But then again, I mean, they also probably have 401ks and are seeing the destruction of their financial life for, as John put it, for no reason, for zero reason. There's no external disaster that can explain this. Pure caprice from the White House.
Well, and there's also the problem of what happens when if an external crisis hits.
Yeah.
He's troubling trouble before trouble troubles him, right? But when you're president, eventually trouble troubles you from the outside. And if that happens while he's got all this self-made chaos, the whole thing's going to blow up really quickly.
But we should say that he is, as he has been from the beginning, including on the right, he is fortunate in his enemies.
Yeah.
Because, and I don't mean you as his enemy. I'm talking about on the political stage. He is fortunate in his enemies because then he gets Chris Van Hollen having a margarita with Abrego Garcia. He gets people defending Harvard, which again, maybe the war on Harvard is stupid, or maybe he'll lose it, or maybe it's incredibly vulgar, or it's violation of academic freedom. I am so not interested in any arguments in favor of why he's being unjustified in this war on Harvard that it's hard for me to. However, I do think that if you have a Democratic Party that decides that it's going to stand or fall on whether or not Harvard gets enough money from the federal government, Trump is fortunate in having that set of ideas and the people who are going to essentially advocate.
Yeah, but look, the Democrats are eventually going to get their act together. There is. It's not going to become the AOC party.
Why not? Republicans became the Trump party. Why can't it become the AOC party?
Well, you're right. Maybe it will, but I something makes me doubt that. I think there is enough of a kind of an abiding intelligence among Democratic leaning voters that if they go in that route, they're guaranteeing themselves a J.D. Vance presidency, followed by a Donald Trump Jr. presidency, followed by, the Laura Trump whatever. And they don't want that. And I think what Trump is doing is creating a really good lane for people like Seth Moulton or other centrist Democrats to say, all I'm offering America is a return to normal. All I'm offering is a return to the America that you remember, where there was due process, rule of law, and you could expect that tomorrow would look pretty much the same as it did yesterday.
But all presidencies, all successful candidates for president do that, right? If you actually think about it, Trump, oddly enough, was offering in 2024 a return to normalcy. Like, I'm not senile. We have a senile president and a intellectually challenged vice president who was flipped in with no oversight, a kind of, internal coup to put her in. This is not normal. What else is not normal is like sending 7 prosecutors after one person so that that person can't run the party. Elect me. I'm more normal than they are. Now he looks abnormal. Biden said the same thing in 2020. I'm a return to normalcy. You're saying the Democrats don't want to be the AOC party. Was the Biden presidency all that different from what an AOC presidency would be, particularly in 2024 in relation to Israel and Gaza? I'm not talking about 20. I'm not talking about the end of 23 through October through December 23 when the Biden administration was supportive.
I don't know. Would AOC have sent arms to Ukraine? I mean, we all agree about how incompetently the Biden administration handled it, but would she have done it? I mean,
no, I could say that
yeah.
because that's also a generational thing within the Democratic Party. Why don't we move to Ukraine? There is something very vague about the way the administration is talking about how its efforts, its overtures haven't been successful, and it's going to wipe its hands of its peace arrangement, right? This is again like the tariffs. Nobody asked him to negotiate a peace between Russia and Ukraine. Putin didn't ask him. Zelensky didn't ask him. He asserted that he could end the war on day one as part of his campaign strategy in 24. But nobody who has actually got, blood on the ground said, please come in and settle this for us. And he went in and he did doing whatever the hell it is that he's doing. And now he's mad that he's not getting listened to. So I don't even, except for the fact that we're obviously not going to be sending Ukraine any more arms, which I guess is fundamentally a way of determining what the outcome of the war will be. Ukraine's not going to is not going to stop fighting, and Russia's not going to stop droning and hitting Kiev and stuff like that. So where is who is he appealing to here? No one asked him to do this.
Yeah. That's a good question. Who is he appealing to? Who among his actual core supporters really care one way or the other? So if they don't care,
there are core supporters who want Russia to win, right? I mean, we know that
there's a Tucker Carlson wing, but I don't think that is most Republicans.
Right.
And also, he could accomplish what he's accomplishing by ignoring it from the beginning, right? The terms of the deal that he's offering Ukraine are essentially the terms that Putin is offering, right? I keep what I took. And, the only thing that stands out is that Trump isn't asking Ukraine to limit the rebuilding of its armed forces and not putting a ceiling on its self-defense. That was the only other demand that Putin made. But you would get here if Trump never got involved at all, right? I mean, this is basically just him sort of riding the momentum of things as they stand now, like calling time out, like, all right, here's where the lines are. Everybody stop here. But if he weren't involved at all, you would be in the same exact place.
See, I think it's worse than that, because I think Putin looks at the order of battle and things and says, maybe 6 months ago, I would have been happy to come to the table with Zelensky and say, we just stop now. I'm going to keep what I have. You keep what you have. If Zelensky would have agreed because Ukraine, has lost heart in the war, he's losing too many people, that could end. With Trump there, what incentive does Putin have to stop the war?
No,
Ukraine's not going to get not going to get more American arms. He's going to start he feels confident enough to start hitting Kyiv, as he did yesterday with drones, and maybe he can get 50% of Ukraine before he decides he's eaten enough of this sovereign country. Trump will be responsible for that. Trump is the person who will have led him to believe that he has a free hand.
On this who is Trump appealing to question, if Trump had actually made a peace deal, if he had ended the war, he'd be appealing to everyone. It's the fact that he's failed completely is why it appeals to no one. I think it was doomed to fail.
Right.
But this came up during the campaign when Trump was asked about Russia and do you support this side? And Trump is I just want it to end. Too many people dying, and that must have polled well for him or something, if he cared. And that was the idea. But
Can
obviously, it
I
was
tell you a story that the late George Shultz told me in his 90s when he was at the Hoover Institution? And I sat in his office for an hour and a half, and he told me this story about when he was Secretary of Labor in the Nixon administration, which I'd never heard and which I think he wrote about, but is really not a well-known story. There was some kind of a major labor action in New Orleans, maybe at a port. I don't remember what, but it was damaging and injurious to the American economy as understood, particularly in the middle of the Vietnam War and with all sorts of other troubles. And the idea was that Schultz was going to go and negotiate an end to this was going to resolve it. And then when he was done, Nixon would fly down and be present for the peace between the Union and whoever it was the Union was striking. I'm sorry that I don't remember the specific details.
Yeah.
And Schultz was there, and they were on the verge of making a deal, and the deal was struck, and he called the White House and said, get ready for the president to get on on Air Force One to come down, and we'll have this big victory. And as president was like at Andrews about to take off, and the labor leader said, oh, wait a minute, I'm the, point 27 in this arrangement is bad, and I'm unhappy about it, and I don't really know how I feel about this. And Schultz called and said, don't let the plane go back to the White House. The deal is not done. President needs to be nowhere near this. He should only come near this when we finally get the terms set and something's happened at the 11th hour. And he should not be landing in New Orleans. And, nobody knew. It was 1969, so there was no Twitter. So no one knew, oh, the president's gone to Andrews. Like, it wasn't a secret. And I'm sure there was a pool with him. But it was something that they could have contained without anybody knowing about it. And Schultz said, because you don't involve the president until all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And then he swoops in and takes the credit. That's the best way for this to be done. And otherwise, it harms the institution of the presidency. It affects his power, his ability to make other deals later. And that this was the first lesson he learned as an important public official. And he was one of the great public officials of our age. And Trump is the first and last negotiator here. Yeah. So he has no, whether he sends Witkoff or Rubio or whoever, he's got no insulation from the failures. Every failure of this administration is his failure, as far as I can tell.
It's very well observed. Yep.
So that's disheartening. And let me ask you, since you brought up Erdogan, and you've written about this and talked about this, that while this is all happening, things are happening in Europe that are, as though they're 4 years behind us and 4 years ahead of us, in the sense that you have these populist parties that are making, very, very strong showings that are basically saying that the European liberal consensus of the last 50 years must be shattered if these countries are to be saved from themselves. How seriously do you take this, and how much of it do you think is justifiable? That the populism is actually, in a different way from the United States, justifiable in the sense that the political system in these countries really did not take account of how the public was feeling about how the elites were insisting on mass migration and various other things.
The revolt against the elites is entirely justifiable. Unfortunately, the people who are doing the revolting are often revolting, and so that's the nub of the problem, which is that you don't have a kind of a compelling, intellectually coherent and politically popular reaction to the way in which elite politics were conducted in Europe in the past 30 plus years, with I would say Angela Merkel as the emblem of that style of kind of brainless consensual politics that is the proximate cause for the rise of the AfD in Germany. A very disturbing set of people that those of us who care about liberty should be nowhere close to, or other far right parties in Europe. Now, not all of them are quite the same. I hasten to point out, and when a group like France's rally, it's front, it used to be the National Front, now it's the rally, I think, when they do make an effort to dispose of their anti-Semitic record, we should welcome it, not treat it with. I mean, we should trust but verify, I should say, but we should not treat it with disdain. So, not all of these parties are quite the same. I don't think that the right in Holland is quite the same as Geert Wilders is not the AfD, but some of these characters are not only fascistic, but in the traditional sense, but many of them are very sympathetic to Putin. And one of my great worries is that once Putin kind of rolls up the American right, as he has with Trump, he's going to similarly take advantage of what happens in Europe. A lot is going to depend on whether Friedrich Merz has a successful leadership chance in Germany, but he's hamstrung by the fact that coalition politics in Germany mean that even when you have a right-wing prime or right-of-center prime minister, he has to make deals with leftist coalition partners that are going to damage economic growth. So Europe is really, with the interesting exception of Italy, by the way, really leaderless and rudderless in a period where I think the continent is maybe, for all intents and purposes, lost. I, I see no good futures for Europe. And I just came back from Paris 2 days ago.
Can I tell a quick story about Italy? Because I was in Italy at Christmas time, and met people in the Jewish community in Rome. Very interesting political community, actually, very small, 35,000 Jews in Rome.
The
Half
oldest Jewish community in the world, really.
Yeah, like the woman that I'm about to tell the anecdote about, her mother is American, moved to Italy. Her father is in a family that has been in Rome for 2,200 years, literally since since the days of the Hasmonean, since the Maccabees. Basically,
Yeah.
they came across the Mediterranean, settled in Rome, and have been there almost uninterruptedly. So this is a pretty interesting, sort of like world, and they are, as Jews are everywhere, they are relatively liberal. They need a liberal society. It's liberals who were friendly to Jews, and obviously fascists who were not, and people on the far right who were not, and so they have a muscle memory about this, and they were terrified of the coming of Giorgia Meloni, the current prime minister of Italy. She's a populist nationalist. Everything in the press said she was this, hard right-wing figure and all that. And they were terrified of her coming. And then she gets into office, and to their absolute astonishment, is incredibly friendly toward Israel, which they did not expect, and they did not know, and they did not appreciate that there would be a connection between her rhetoric about the problem of unrestrained immigration into Italy and the threat to Israel from the Muslim world, and that she would see this connection and therefore as I think is also true of the rally, that there's been an evolution in consciousness about Jews to some extent among some of these people. Not that they should be trusted, but that this was a lesson for very intellectual Italian Jews that the world is changing, and that in a place in which the sole issue that is of concern to them, literally the sole issue that is concern to them, which is the treatment of Jews, so people who live, in proximity to the ghetto from which they only emerged 200 years ago, you know, is things are changing. And so I thought this was a very interesting experience, because Maloney is different, and Trump is about to go see Maloney, right, next week or something.
No, they just saw each other,
right? But he's going to Italy.
Yeah, that's true, for the Pope
on this trip, and so much so, by the way, that that the person I spoke to is an American citizen, and her mother's an American citizen. She's not, but her mother's an American citizen, and so her mother had a vote in the 2024 election, and she and her siblings were beating on her mother's head to vote for Trump, because their idea was, look at the way Harris and Biden are behaving toward Israel, and we've learned our lesson with Maloney, that Maloney is a friend and Trump at least talks friendly. And like, the mother agreed, who hated Trump and didn't want to vote for Trump and hadn't voted for him in 16 or 20, agreed she wouldn't vote for Harris, but she probably couldn't vote for Trump, but that she wouldn't vote for Harris. And they deemed that an interesting victory. That was my European conversion experience in Rome at the end of 2024. We shouldn't end here without talking a little about Israel. You were, as when I first met you, you were actually wasn't when I first met you, but you were the editor of the Jerusalem Post at the age of 12, and all of that, and still
sometime around the same age you became Jeopardy champion.
Yeah, well, there you go. So I was listening to our friend Dan Seener's podcast, and Ari Shavit is on. Interesting. I haven't heard from Ari Shavit for a long time. If you don't know who he is, whatever. Anyway, so Ari Shavit is trying to give a fair, dispassionate summary of the politics, and says some very interesting things. He says for the right, for the left, Bibi is like Nixon trying to order the security services to spy on his enemies. And for the right, Ronan Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, whom Bibi is trying to fire, is J. Edgar Hoover, and is using his power to enhance his own power and the authority of the Shin Bet, and trampling over everybody's civil liberties, and should be stopped. And I thought that was a sort of pretty interesting analogy and interesting, dispassionate way of looking at things. And then, goes into 20 minutes in, he's like, but Bibi is basically Erdogan, or he's what he's trying to do is be a French monarch. It's the l'état c'est moi. That's how I really feel. And I was thinking, like, even for people who have the ability to suss out the interesting dynamics in Israeli politics, this Bibi standing there blotting out the sun for everybody and making it impossible for there to be a rational conversation about things like executive power, executive authority, and what's going on with this war. Where are you on all this?
Well, on the specific question of Barr versus Bibi, I'm with Bibi. I mean, the idea that essentially the Secret Service in Israel should be above elected officials and accountable only to a sympathetic Supreme Court joined in its disdain for the elected prime minister, I think is bonkers. And I think it's a real problem in Israel, which is that the people who claim to speak in the name of democracy have anti-democratic instincts, because they believe that they are entitled essentially to hold the real levers of power. And I say this as a guy who's written one column after another wishing, for Bibi not to be the prime minister. I would vastly prefer Naftali Bennett. but on at least two issues, this one and the question of the prosecution of the war in Gaza, I find myself kind of relieved that Bibi is the prime minister. To me, the more interesting story in Israel was the speech that Bibi gave, I guess, a week ago or so, when he said that this idea that we're going to tell Hamas that we're withdrawing and get our hostages back and then say, oh, just kidding, we're going back in, is a fantasy. And he's been absolutely right on this, on the matter of cutting off the Philadelphia corridor, now continuing to put military pressure on Hamas. The idea that Israel would have sacrificed as many soldiers as it has since October 7th in Gaza so that Hamas can then rearm in 3 years as opposed to 2 is an insane theory. And now, finally, by the way, the other story that has my attention is Mahmoud Abbas, a despicable figure on so many counts, but nonetheless, interestingly, Mahmoud Abbas finally publicly insisting that Hamas uh, uh, surrender the hostages and get out of the business of ruling Gaza, which is obviously something that he should have said on October 8th. But it's an interesting political signal about the effect that a hard line in Gaza is finally having, not only militarily against Hamas, but politically among Palestinians, to start the process of a revolt against their kind of rule.
One thing that occurs to me, where that you mentioned Abbas, who I think is 84 years old. Everybody that we've been talking about here in terms of,
I think he is 88.
it was
or
88.
9.
Okay. So Trump is 78. Biden obviously was 82 last year. Putin is in his 70s. Bibi 76. We are having all these conversations about these leaders who their enemies say, Putin's already there, but their enemies say want to institute dictatorships and like be in power. Ari Shavit saying that Bibi is l'état c'est moi, and Trump wants to, like be a dictator but to never leave office and all this. And they're all so old. Like, is this really their consuming? I mean, there's something weird. I mean, think about sort of the dictators of the 20th century. Like, they were young when they came into power, and they had reason to think that if they could just hold on to power, they could be in power for 50 years. And some of them were, I mean, but how old was Hitler? How old was Mussolini? How old was Stalin? Stalin was in power for 30 years. Putin's already been in power for 25 years and is old. There's something weird about this conversation because time is not on their side in terms of their own mortality. And maybe everybody is like, we just default to this idea that everybody wants autocracy and suspension of democracy and liberties. I just think Trump wants to garner as much money and power as he can for a while and then back off. That's I don't think he particularly wants to run the world. He would like to get his meme coin, to $20 billion or something.
With these guys, it's always like some version of Tennyson's Ulysses. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. You always think, oh, when I'm 75, I'm going to start caring about my grandchildren and work on my legacy and, kind of tie up all the loose ends of life. But my observation of people like, Rupert Murdoch, for example, marrying for the 17th time at the age of 95 or something, is that these guys never want to get out of the game. There's always another day to live. So I don't know what Trump wants. I don't think he knows what he wants. He wants to rule the world and then the galaxy and then become immortal. And fortunately, nature has other ideas.
I really do think that the key thing that happened this week is in relation to Trump was this idea that he was going to have this special dinner for the people who invested in his Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because that, I think, if you really want to know where Democrats have blown it in for the last 8 years, he is doing the emoluments now. This is all happening now in front of our very eyes. The actual impeachable and convictable behavior of using the presidency as a corrupt institution to enrich yourself and your family. And that argument has been made almost impossible by the by the persecutions, by the way he was being pursued by Democrats over the last 8 years, so that now it's like Chicken Little, and they might have him dead to rights, including with some Republicans. Not that they need 67 Republicans to convict him in the Senate. I mean, they need 67 to convict him in the Senate, obviously, and that's a very hard lift. But it's all happening.
Also, do how many members of Congress understand what the meme coin thing is? That works in his favor too.
That's true. But it's not just the meme coin. I mean, it's
you don't even really have to understand
Witkoff and Gutter and all of these. This is all happening.
Well, that's why Witkoff was hired, because he dealt with Qatar, right? I mean, that was even what got him the job in the first place. It's all out sort of in the open. I like the deal this guy made with the Qataris on real estate in Manhattan. So he's going to come work for me.
But then he's not going to hold the Qataris' feet to the fire because he still wants their money. And then who gets a taste of that money? I mean, again, even having these conversations, these are things I would never say about. I would never have said about any president ever. I'm not like the American Spectator with Clinton or anything like that. But like Witkoff makes some deal with Gutter. Why isn't he cutting Donald Jr. in on it? Like that's who they are.
Yep.
So I don't know. I keep wondering whether if there is a kind of implosion in the face, if the faceplant leads to an implosion, which is a horrible mixed metaphor.
Well, that might be the answer to the question before about who's he appealing to, which is that no one, or himself, because he's not running for office again. And if you can't figure out who the policies are aimed at, but you can see how he can benefit from being in office, then I think maybe the question answers itself.
And maybe in picking J.D. Vance, he did exactly what what Biden did in picking Kamala Harris, which is like, oh, you impeach me, you want him? I know a lot of people on the right are enjoying J.D. Vance, but I don't, they can enjoy J.D. Vance. He's a very, very frightening figure to me, anyway. More frightening in many ways than Trump.
A sinister, purely opportunistic, and shallow character.
But skilled, very skilled.
Yes.
I mean, he's had a rise like nobody else pretty much in American life ever, I would say. From a nobody to a best-selling author to a hedge fund guy to a senator to a vice president in 9 years.
Yep.
10 years ago, he was writing under a pseudonym for David Frum's website. Just keep that in mind. Anyway,
all right.
So Bret Stephens, thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure, John.
Joining us.
Looking good.
Yeah, you're looking good. Like I say, Abe and you guys are, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that you could do a Bret Abe beard off.
Yeah.
Very attractive, scruffy, that kind of scruffy.
Seth's got his beard all together.
But Seth has the. Well, Seth, you trimmed your beard. If you had seen Seth 6 months ago, Brett, he really was getting into a combination of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and like Grizzly Adams. Like it was the perfect.
My Lithuanian forebears were, I was summoning them. Yeah, it was COVID. And then Like, all right, time to be human again.
Exactly. Okay.
COVID
Well,
lulled us into this.
Well, my own Lithuanian forebears continue to summon me, and will do so for some time.
okay. So everybody, if you want interesting reading on important issues of Jewish life, go to is it SapirQuarterly.com or
It's superiorjournal.org.
SapirJournal.org, and you can get it for free. By the way, you can read this magazine for free online or get it. It'd be beautifully physically present in your hands. Some very, very wonderful stuff in there. And I don't say that, I say that advisedly because of course you're on my turf here.
Yeah, we're
even
complimentary. We're not competitors.
Fair enough, because you are. Yeah, okay. So, Bret Stephens, Sapir, New York Times, Sapir debates, go to 92nd Street Y, or Sapir to go see the Is Donald Trump Good for the Jews with Jason Greenblatt and Rahm Emanuel in May. Is it May?
May 15th.
May 15th, okay. 2 days after the State of the World Jewry address at the 92nd Street Y by Dan Senor, by the way. A lot of Jewish action at the 92nd Street Y.
Yeah, and only 10 days after Cinco de Mayo. I mean, there's
well, these are the two sides of Bret's character, because as you may know, people do not know, Bret grew up in Mexico City and is therefore have you broken matzah with Claudia Scheinbaum? That's what I want to know.
No, she's not my kind of matzah breaker.
She's not much of a matzah breaker, I think.
She's not much of a matzah breaker.
Not a big fan of Israel either. But it is funny that Mexico does have a Jewish president. That was not on my bingo card.
No, in
the course of my life, I will say.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So
all right. Be well.
Thanks. And for Seth and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.